Where does this Buccaneers roster stack up against teams of the past? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. Credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message about the Bucs or about anything else in general. I've had lots of conversations with the insiders over the course of a Memorial Day weekend about all kinds of things. It's really been a lot of fun. If you want to join in the fun, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. One Buccaneers rookie is already getting some praise from Chris Godwin. That's coming up in a little bit, but I wanted to start things off with another mailbag question that came in a little late, but I thought it was interesting enough that I should go ahead and talk about it. So Insider Stu, and shout out to Stu's stepdad who's recovering. Hope it's a speedy and full recovery there with some issues that he had. But Stu messaged me and asked, what's your take? Where would you rank this Bucs roster versus other rosters of the Bucs franchise? And honestly, that's a really tough question simply because we haven't seen this one play yet. Yes, they have a lot of the same players from last year returning, but with the additions of Jordan Whitehead, Tavierre Thomas, Bryce Hall, you have the 2024 draft class. It's hard to predict where they are going to improve, where they may still struggle. And we have to see them play before we can give an appropriate assessment. With all of that said, I can tell you where I could project them to be based off of last year and where I think they got better. In order to do that, I think you have to take a look at all the teams of franchise past, right? And I think this 2024 team has the chance to be top 5 in terms of all time in Bucs history. They are not going to be top 2. Those spots, no matter how this team finishes, I think the top 2 are already locked and loaded. And there could be some debate over who is number 1 and who is number 2. But when I sat down to take a look at all this, I think the 2020 Buccaneers roster was the greatest one of all time. And I know I'm already going to get flack in the chat or people yelling at their podcast feed because of the legendary players from the 2002 team. But top to bottom, both sides of the ball, I think the 2020 team was the best. Tom Brady, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette, Gronk, Antonio Brown, Vita Vea, Levante Devin, the run that he was on in the postseason, Carlton Davis, the heater that Jamel Dean was on, rookie Antoine Winfield Jr., and Ndamukong Suh, JPP, Shaq Barrett, Mike Edwards, Donovan Smith was playing the best football he had ever played. Ronald Jones was having an incredible year. Scotty Miller was huge down the stretch. I think if you go down the line, starter versus starter, the 2020 Buccaneers team wins out. And I think the big difference was that the 2020 team was more complete. The 2002 offense was much better than we had seen over the course of that window where the Buccaneers were competing, but they weren't the machine that 2020 was. Brad Johnson, Keyshawn Johnson, Keenan McCardell, Michael Pittman, Mike Allstott, Ken Dilger, they just don't match up to the onslaught of weapons that the 2020 offense had. Defensively, honestly, I think it was pretty even. You had Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, John Lynch, Rondé Barber, all Hall of Famers. So that's certainly going to be hard to beat. Simeon Rice should be in the Hall of Fame. You had Brian Kelly, and then you had Dwight Smith and Dexter Jackson decide to have career days on the biggest stage of them all. Shelton Quarles was consistently overlooked and underrated because of the shadow that Big Four cast over everyone. But that was an all-time defense. So even if you give the slight edge to the 2002 defense over the 2020 defense, the offense in 2020 was so much better, like leaps and bounds better, that the overall roster and depth has to make the 2020 Buccaneers the greatest team in franchise history. Number two, obviously, is the 2002 team. And then for number three, I think you're looking at the 2021 team. Again, elite players across both sides of the field. And if it hadn't been for injuries and head cases, they're probably going back to back. Then you take a look at who the number three team in franchise history is. And some of you may want the 1979 NFC Championship team here, but I think I'm going to go with 1999. That might honestly be the best defense the Buccaneers ever had in a single season. They held the greatest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams, to 11 points in their own stadium in the NFC Championship. It was unreal. And of course, you had the infamous Bert Emanuel play, which absolutely was a catch. And it might have sent the Buccaneers to the Super Bowl. But that 1999 defense was something special. In addition to some of the other guys that I mentioned from 2002, you had Chidi Ahanatu, Brad Culpepper, Steve White, Hardy Nickerson, Donnie Abraham. They were dominant and they were smothering, and they deserved to win a ring that year for the defense alone. Offensively is where things were dicey. You all remember Trent Dilfer being replaced by Sean King. And yes, they had the awesome electric duo of Warrick Dunn and Mike Alstott in the backfield. But I think what hurts is the fact that Emmanuel and Jaquez Green were the top two receiver duos, and they just weren't going to get the job done. They combined for just over 1,000 yards receiving that season. And that's what infamously led to the conversation between Keyshawn Johnson and Warren Sapp at the Pro Bowl, where Keyshawn told Sapp, if I'm on the team, I get you those 6 points. And that, of course, referred to the Bucs having lost the NFC Championship by 5 points. So Sapp got in the ears of those in power, and the Bucs turn around and they make a huge trade with the New York Jets for Keyshawn Johnson. So, I mean, right there are my top four teams in franchise history already. You have 2020, the Super Bowl 55 team at number one. You have 2002, the Super Bowl 37 team at number two. You have the 2021 roster coming in third place. And then in fourth, you have the 1999 NFC Championship team that was oh so close to facing the Tennessee Titans in the Super Bowl. Would they have beaten the Titans? I don't know. The Titans had an absolutely fantastic defense that year too. I don't know if they would have had enough on offense to get that job done, but that defense was so smothering that they would have shut down guys like Eddie George and Steve McNair and Kevin Dyson and all those players that the Titans had that were so good. Frank Wycheck, the tight end. So, those are my top four teams. So where do I project the 2024 roster in terms of Buccaneers teams of all time? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, over-unders, money lines, player props, parlays, and more. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. The Boston Celtics are the favorites to win the NBA Finals at minus 240, followed by the Dallas Mavericks at plus 200, then the Minnesota Timberwolves at plus 4,100, and the Indiana Pacers at an astounding plus 75,000. Sadly, No one is going to remember how close these conference finals games really were. In the race for Lord Stanley's Cup, the greatest trophy in all of sports, you have the Dallas Stars, the New York Rangers, and the Edmonton Oilers all tied at plus 250 apiece. Then the Florida Panthers at plus 360. It is a tight race in the NHL, and literally any of these teams can win it. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Every day airs tomorrow. I will have my breakdown of Tyke Smith coming up for you. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis as well as opinions and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I have my top four, and I think what we're looking at in terms of predicting and projecting the success of the 2024 Buccaneers is being number 6 on the list. I have to put that 1979 team at number 5 for right now. You go from starting 2-24 in their first 2 seasons to being in the NFC Championship in their 4th season. It's absolutely incredible. Of course, ownership had to go and screw all of that up. Once they found a legitimate quarterback in Doug Williams, ownership decided that they didn't want to pay him, and he goes on to win a Super Bowl with the Washington Redskins. They had Ricky Bell in the backfield, Jimmy Giles being one of the best tight ends in the game, and of course, Leroy Selman leading the charge on defense. That was an awesome team that Bucs fans and the city really rallied around, all just to watch it get ripped down by stupidity and a decade plus of disaster to follow. When I look at this Buccaneers team, this Buccaneers roster, I think they're better than the team that we saw last year, which was already an impressive team in and of itself. Certainly better than any of the teams in the 2010s, arguably better than any team from after 2022 in terms of the early 2000s. I know Gruden gets a lot of love for leading the Bucs to their first Super Bowl, but he didn't really do anything after that except draft horribly, make bad free agent decisions, and lose in the first round of the playoffs every other year. I listed off the talent from that 2020 team, and I don't think there's any argument that there's another Bucs roster to ever have as much talent on both sides of the ball. And I would venture to say that outside of 2020, 2021, and maybe 2002, there isn't another Bucs roster with this much talent in 2024, again, on both sides of the ball. Yes, the 2002 defense was absolutely better than what the Bucs 2024 defense is on paper, but the offense is where it's light years better. Baker Mayfield, I think, is better than Brad Johnson. Mike and Chris, definitely better than Keyshawn and Keenan. Rashad is probably on par with Michael Pittman. Cade Otton is better than Ken Dilger. And then you still have the potential of Jalen McMillan and Bucky Irving. You have Tristan Wirfs, who might already be the greatest offensive lineman in team history, plus the potential of Graham Barton being an all-pro center for the next decade plus. This 2024 offense easily surpasses 2002, in my opinion. But even defensively, you have the core in Vita, Levante, and Antoine. You have the young blood in Kalijah Kancey, Yaya Diaby, Chris Braswell, Zion McCullum. You have the return of Jordan Whitehead. You have some unknowns, of course, in Jamel Dean and Tavier Thomas and Bryce Hall. But we've seen some great from Jamel Dean, so we know what he's capable of. It's a matter of, can he bounce back from 2023? You also have an unknown in Joe Tryon-Shoyinka and whether or not he will finally start to click. The unknowns in KJ Britt or Servassier Dennis at linebacker. There's a lot of questions still remaining, which is why I'm penciling them in at number 6, because all those questions that I mentioned, we've seen flashes from. We've seen what they're capable of, And it's a matter of whether or not they can perform on a consistent basis and get it done. It's about whether or not they beat themselves or if they shock the world again. What is Liam Cohen going to bring to this team? What changes are we going to see from Todd Bowles with the additions that they've made on defense? But honestly, right now, I think this is one of the most talented rosters the Bucs have ever had when you go player by player down the line. Now it's a matter of execution, dedication, and understanding of the schemes. When you look at the history of the franchise, the 2024 Bucs roster already have some of the greatest players in team history at their position. Mike Evans, greatest wide receiver in team history. Levante David, he is right there behind Derek Brooks. Chris Godwin, he's right there behind Mike Evans. And then you have Tristan certainly being in the argument for left tackle, and he might already have that title. Antoine is right there behind John Lynch. Baker, give Baker some time in another season or two like he had last year, and he's going to be right there behind Tom Brady. He's already probably the second best quarterback the Bucs have had this century. You can, of course, make the case for Brad Johnson, who was the quarterback of a Super Bowl winning team. You can, of course, make a case for Jeff Garcia, who came in and really did some great things as the quarterback of the Buccaneers. But in my book, he's already better than both of those guys in terms of just being a pure quarterback. And he's certainly better, in my opinion, again, than Jameis Winston, Josh Freeman, Ryan Fitzpatrick, or Mike Glennon, because outside of Johnson and Brady, he did something that no other Bucs quarterback did, and that's win a playoff game. So we're going to have to revisit this after the season to see if I feel the same way, see how things clicked, see how the guys fit into the scheme, see where they improved, see where they regressed. But I have no doubt about the level of pure talent on this roster being some of the best that the franchise has ever seen. Speaking of that talent, Chris Godwin gives some praise to a Buccaneers rookie. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. Some of you probably saw on Twitter that I was able to take my son to Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals so he could root on his Boston Celtics, and those last-minute deals from Game Time helped us get the best seats I have ever had for an NBA game, let alone an Eastern Conference Finals game. With Game Time's last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off for those playoff tickets. The process was as easy as it can get. I just used Apple Pay and had those tickets on my phone in 2 clicks. No surprises either. With all-in pricing, I knew exactly what I was going to spend for that game and what I will spend looking for seats to our next event to go to. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and Chris Godwin had some glowing remarks about his new position buddy and rookie wide receiver, Jalen McMillan. Godwin was speaking with the media and was asked about Jalen, and he said, quote, "I like him, man. I think he seems like he's a good kid from day one. You can tell he's been coming in here eager to learn. He's got real good movements about him, good hands. You can tell he was coached really well. I think he's going to be a great fit for our room," end quote. McMillan is already starting to turn a couple of heads in practice. And now, of course, you have to take that with a grain of salt, given that there's no pads, there's no contact. It's really easy to shine in these OTA practices. But McMillan is going to go toe-to-toe with Trey Palmer for that wide receiver 3 spot on this team. And ultimately, I think he's going to win out. I'm not saying Palmer's not going to get his snaps. I'm not saying that Devin Tompkins or Raheem Jarrett aren't going to get their snaps. They absolutely will. But depending on how quickly Jalen McMillan can grasp the scheme that Liam Cohen wants to run and grasp that playbook and get an understanding of where he needs to be on the field at any given moment. And then, of course, build that rapport with Baker Mayfield. I do think that McMillan is going to be an absolute weapon for the Bucs this season. I'm going to preface this. I'm not saying he's going to be Antonio Brown, but think about that 2020 season that I was talking about earlier in this show. If defenses wanted to double Mike Evans, Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown had one-on-ones. If they doubled Chris, then it was Mike and AB who got the one-on-ones. You double AB, now Chris and Mike had the advantage. McMillan was brought in to garner that type of threat to opposing defenses. If they want to double Evans, well, now you have Godwin out of the slot and McMillan on the outside. If they double Chris, it's Mike and it's Jalen. Jalen isn't going to get the double teams until he earns them, but he can earn them sooner than later if he takes advantage of his opportunities early on. If he's out there scorching guys and he's winning one-on-ones and battles, or finding the soft spots in the zone for catches and first downs and catch and runs, and he's getting big time yards after the catch, he's going to start to garner some of that attention. And then it's really going to cause problems for defensive coordinators trying to scheme against those three guys consistently. And you have three formidable receivers now that can win in man-on-man. They can win in zone. All three of them have the ability to take a 5-yard catch and make it a 25-yard gain. All three of them have the ability to go up and high point the ball in the red zone or the end zone and turn those into big plays. All three have the ability to put corners on skates and beat them with their elite level route running. McMillan very well could be a big problem this season. I'm hoping that it comes to fruition sooner than later. But again, McMillan has to earn it. You go back to training camps and OTAs of the past, and we talked about guys like Kenny Bell and how he was turning heads and wowing guys with his speed and doing all these things. Then the pads came on and Kenny Bell went into his shell. You can go back and look at plenty of receivers in the Bucs past that were that way. Guys that wowed in the first year of their career and then started to disappear. And of course, now Michael Clayton was that way. He was, one of the best rookie wide receivers we had ever seen, and then never could match that again. You go back to Mike Williams and the connection that he had with Josh Freeman, then he regressed. You can take a look at a lot of these guys. So it goes way beyond impressing in OTAs and mini camps and training camps. McMillan has to be able to show that he can do on an NFL field what he did for the Washington Huskies. And, McMillan, after my Tyke Smith film breakdown on tomorrow's episode, McMillan will be the next one up. And I'm going to dive in and really see where he was able to play. And it's going to be a little bit tougher to break down McMillan because he was so limited in a large stretch of last season for the Huskies because he was battling injury. And I mentioned it on Locked On NFL on Monday that, he had teammates coming up to him and saying, look, you need to just take your time and sit out. He kept trying to return to the field too soon, re-aggravating an injury, and wasn't the player that he needed to be. And his teammates flat out said, we can get through this, but we need you in December. We need you in January. And you could tell how the offense in Washington changed when McMillan wasn't on the field. Jason Light talked about it as well, that if McMillan had played a full season and played the way that they knew he was capable of, he's not sitting there for the Buccaneers at the end of the third round. He's probably gone in the second round. So McMillan has the opportunity here to really take this Buccaneers offense up to a new level. Chris Godwin working out of the slot in that Cooper Kupp role is going to really create problems. Mike Evans always creates problems, but you add a receiver of the caliber of Jalen McMillan, and if he can replicate his collegiate success into the NFL world, that is going to be one of the best wide receiver trios in the National Football League. I think Houston kind of has that crown right now. And you take a look at what the Rams are going to be able to do with their wide receivers. You take a look at the wide receivers now in Chicago, and that's impressive. Do they have a quarterback that can get him the ball? I don't know. You have, formidable wide receivers in Miami. But when you take a look at trios, not duos, trios, if Jalen McMillan is able to be what he was in Washington for the Buccaneers, this could be an all-time Buccaneers offense in terms of yards per game, in terms of points per game, in terms of, could we be talking, Chris Godwin returns in 2025, and now all of a sudden, Godwin, Evans, and McMillan are all in this offense again together? You could be talking about within the next 2 to 3 years having 3 1,000-yard receiving wide receivers. That's how talented Jalen McMillan is. That's how, and I mentioned it when they drafted him, how refined and impressive his route running ability is at such a young age. And that has him on the fast track in the NFL, because a lot of these wide receivers coming out of college, they don't have the route tree nailed down the way Jalen McMillan does. A lot of them are 1-trick, 2-trick ponies. They have to kind of learn how to be an all-around wide receiver. Jalen McMillan already has that box checked off. He can run every route on that tree, and he can do it efficiently, and he can do it by lulling the corner into sleep, essentially, and then hitting him with some of the most impressive and most crisp routes and cuts I have seen out of a rookie wide receiver in quite some time. My film breakdown on Tyke Smith is coming up tomorrow. In the meantime, please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure that you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up today. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.